lead off, Ian, and I will follow.
Right. Well, there's the two of us today are presenting this webinar for you. My name is Ian Cox. I'm a principal advisor for Waka Kotahi, the transport agency, and I am the government roading representative on the NZUAG board. And I'm also the acting chair, fortunately only for hopefully a very short time longer, but that's the case. Nick.
Thanks, Ian. I think I hopefully I'm sharing screen now.
Yes, but you're a couple down, so there we go.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Ian. Look, my name's Nick Muskelly. I work for Chorus and have done for the last 10 years as we've sort of embarked on quite a large fibre rollout and sort of undertaking a project of that size. I was, undertaking that amount of civil works in the road. I was fairly quickly introduced to the National Code of Practice, and I thought the best way to sort of embrace it was to join the board, and I did so in 2014. So yeah, I think between myself and Ian, there is a fair amount of experience with the National Code. I just sort of click down to a few housekeeping things, as you probably all saw with that earlier message. This webinar is being recorded. We're keen to display it on our website for those that can't make it to be able to watch at a later stage. So I suppose in respect to sort of questions, and we'll sort of have some natural breaks in the presentation where we will sort of look to discuss any questions that have been raised either via the chat, or at that time we'll sort of open up to the group to ask or highlight some questions that they'd like to raise. I think it's probably good to sort of note that we're all at, we all are at different understandings or different stages with the code, and so I just sort of highlight that everyone sort of is respectful of questions or concerns raised, and give everyone a fair chance. Look, this presentation will be available at the below link. So if you go into our website and head to the code review section, you'll be able to find this presentation. There's also some other information that we'll refer to during this presentation that you can find there. And,
it's there now. It's there now, Nick.
Thank you very much, Colin. And as other things come up, that'll be the key part. That'll be the key location to find information and progress around the code review. Probably the last point there is around, has it been launched, the code review? And it has been launched. It was launched at the RIMS conference the 29th of July by our Waipa District Council board member Dawn Inglis. So Ian will highlight later in the presentation some of the key dates that sort of have come from that launch. I suppose objectives from this session, Ian and I will be going through some of the issues that we've identified as needing some attention, and we're really keen to hear your feedback on this, either through the session or particularly through the actual code review process. We're obviously going to highlight some issues, but these aren't, these aren't all the issues that we feel need addressing. So, don't let that hinder other topics you'd like to discuss. And I suppose one key thing is also, this is also a good time to highlight things that are working well in the code. Call outs you might want to make. I think often through processes like this, people forget that focus on what is working well can often lead to key learnings to help areas that you'd like to improve. So don't be limited during with the topics that we're going to raise. So I suppose here is what the board have compiled as issues that we feel need to be sort of addressed through this current code review. We'll obviously go into each topic in a bit more detail and provide question or discussion points through this webinar. I suppose this is a slightly different approach we've taken, and I think it really is around, this is the third code review that is to be undertaken since the introduction in 2011. And basically, I think the industry, we've reached a bit more of a maturity with the code. On the whole, people feel it does, they're aware of it and they feel it does work well. So we felt that we needed a bit more of a target focus for this review and try and encourage a bit more feedback. So I suppose the first one off the list is service strikes, and this was one of the issues that was originally presented to the Minister of Infrastructure as a reason to establish a national code of practice. We're sort of 10 years plus since the code was launched, and it's still very unclear on how much the impact the code has actually had on this area. And I think the considerable concern really around the health and safety issues which are inherent in the nature of third-party strikes. The industry sector has had an opportunity here to make some good progress. We have now good buy-in from other partners who recognise the benefit from reducing service strikes. Our partners see the code as a significant mechanism to take these outcomes from these initiatives forward, and therefore the NZUAG needs its industry members to input on the issues to ensure that what goes forward is fit for purpose, and your own ideas and experiences in this area are great value to ensure that the outcomes are acceptable across the board. It's easier if I share this slightly. It might be slightly easier, sorry about that. So I suppose what have we done? What are we doing really in this area is always a key, sort of question asked to me, and something we've been very conscious of, over the last few years, as we've seen the lack of, where we haven't seen any noticeable improvement. I won't say there hasn't been any improvement, but any noticeable improvement. So we have partnered with Civil Contractors New Zealand recently, and we basically work together with the Centre of Vision and Learning, who are facilitators, to facilitate a series of key stakeholder conversations. This process sort of involved 3 workshops over May, June and July, with experiments undertaken between the second and third workshops to test some of the outputs from those workshops. 3 key priority areas were identified in relation to this. And in order of priority, they were increased transparency and access to asset data, introduction of minimum location standards, clarity of roles and responsibilities, including best practice. So the outputs of these workshops will be made available on the NZUAG website after next week's board meeting. They've actually only recently come out from the last one, and obviously we'll need to review with the rest of the board prior to sort of making them generally available. From those outputs, we'll be making some proposed changes or areas of focus to the code, and we'll also share those either through this, through our website, or as part of the code review process. I think there's certainly one key point that I think needs to be highlighted with any changes that are adopted, and the adoption of the changes is really just the first step, and that probably becomes quite clear in the output packs from our key stakeholders. So I mean, the real key is the implementation and then the education, and that is going to have to be industry supported. I mean, this alignment with NZUAG and Civil Contractors New Zealand, you know, it made a lot of sense. There's a lot of synergy, but we, you know, I think the funding as we look to go further will, you know, we'll need a definite industry buy-in, because it is a very big piece of work to sort of achieve the outcomes that, you know, we're likely to signal from those workshops. We've also had a look internationally to see what approaches others have taken to sort of, you know, get a bit of a, you know, are there some quick wins that we can make? And one of these, you know, has come up in the reporting of how service strikes are reported. So, you know, there's bits and pieces we can look to adopt that can actually hopefully lead to some real change in this area. And I think one of the key things that came through for me is while service strikes were seen as important to 92% of not only the group that took part in the workshop, but the wider stakeholder group, that we surveyed, what was actually considered a strike differed quite greatly. And if we're really to make progress in this area, we need a common understanding of that, and with clear, probably likely aspirational targets, you know, key, you know, known and reported on. So naturally comes into code reporting, and this was established as a mean, you know, with any adoption of a code, especially mandatory, there was we needed to be able to show to the minister of success, really, and these requirements were included in the code. The content of the report has been left a little bit to the NZUAG to determine. I think we're now into, I don't think we reported for the first few years as we sort of bedded in the code, but we'll be coming up to maybe our 7th report now. And it's not clear if there's really any value with what we're being reported, with limited feedback from the minister, and from the actual levels of reporting, it appears there's little value to our members. So for a requirement that is mandatory in law, there has not been enough interest even to get the people who have to report to do so. So I think what we're keen to do through this code review is really those that have to report to actually give some feedback on what they would like to see in such a report, to give it actual value and to encourage something that they have to do anyway, but to provide benefits to the industry. So how do we generate enough interest across the sector for members to do that, given that they don't do it now on a mandatory basis? So that's really the conundrum we're looking to try and, well, whether we solve or at least move towards a better regime through this process. A little bit more detail on the report. Over the last 3 years, we've introduced a Part A. Part A, we've seen as a mandatory reporting requirement, and we've taken that directly out of the code. And then Part B has been set out by a report that Ian will provide a bit more information around our code effectiveness report, and we've placed it as voluntary over the last few years to try and really determine if there's any value in the data or an indication from those providing the data what their view on reporting in that area is. I think one of the questions we've sort of asked in that Part B is really to look at engagement with the code. We sort of use the common sort of net promoter score, which sort of measures customer engagement in a fairly simplistic way. And what we've found is that those actually responding and providing the mandatory response have been really engaged and was scored fairly highly in this area. But unfortunately, with the low response rates, it makes it very difficult to draw any conclusions. So it's certainly something we're really keen to get more feedback on and provide something a little bit more valuable. So the other side of the coin to utility strikes is really accuracy of as-built data. This was seen as a legacy problem for the industry sector with the introduction of the code. The expectation was with the code introduction that this would improve. And obviously with an improvement of as-built data, the expectation was that would see a reduction in the frequency of third-party strikes. But what really has happened is there hasn't been this improvement. The situation 10 years on doesn't feel much different from prior to the introduction of the code. And we're seeing similar behaviours in this area around the accuracy of this data. The code is very clear that the asset owner is responsible for ensuring that the new asset locations are properly recorded. The code provides suggestions around the level of accuracy, but it's not mandatory. And there have been suggestions around actually making this process mandatory or providing guidance, mandatory guidance really around how the recording of assets should be undertaken. But I think when looking into the problem, part of the model of obtaining those as-built could be the driving force behind the issues and the suppliers having no drivers or financial incentives to provide a higher level of standard in this area. But again, the word aspirational, I mean, that's what we see will likely lead to some change. We feel that asset owners, and I am an asset owner, should be more demanding around location data. But how do we get people to value the data enough to change that behaviour? And I think for me, you know, the code is all about balance. We look to ensure that everything the board does, even as we are today, we've got one representative being a corridor manager, one representative being a utility. So, you know, so even though I represent utilities, I definitely think, from my experience, that the balance is not sitting in the right place with as-built and service strikes. And while we have unknown services in the corridor, we're always going to have strikes. We see significant data collected on project basis only to be discarded at the end, on completion of the project. You know, and I suppose the real thing is, how can the code provide a platform to change this? I suppose that just comes to the end of how we've sort of titled the first section. Not sure, do we?
Colin, is there any questions in the chat?
Probably a good opportunity. If people have got any questions as you go, feel free to send them through via chat, and I will keep note of them for bringing up, but nothing at the moment.
So does anybody have any questions at this stage?
Hi. Sorry, you can go first.
Oh no, I was going to comment on what you just said. It's of course we all have engaged contractors, and we're sort of talking about the behaviour of contractors as well, regardless of what, you know, the principal has agreed to with us or the road controlling authority. And you know, we, especially state highways, we tend to issue 2 or 3 pages of conditions. And then later on we might find, you know, a cable hasn't gone underneath a culvert by the required depth, or there's just the trench, you know, the surface isn't being put deep enough, or you know, it's not against the boundary, or, you know, a whole bunch of other things. It's sort of about sort of an observation, really policing the contractors, or getting proof of, you know, they're not normally going to push back against our conditions. They're more likely to go ahead and ignore them, or, you know, just compromise them, not totally ignore. And then we might come across something decades later when you find a cable going through a culvert. So it's part of my experience is trying to resolve historical things that have happened well after the contract has been and gone. Yeah, sort of comment more than a question.
Nick, it's I'm Peter Hamilton from Wellington City Council. Is there any movement on actually with the as-built information? You talked about being mandatory, a certain standard. How are we getting on with those other countries like Australia? Are they still the same? Because I thought it'd be up to the utility to ensure that its contractors, which it picks, gives them quality data to go back into its database. I mean, surely that's the first thing that needs to happen. And that needs to be undertaken by the utility itself. The utility needs to ensure that it's getting that information by doing checks on that data. just to let you know how we're doing it in Wellington, is we're looking at a digital twin. So for those people who don't know what a digital twin is, we're building our own model because we see the same issues as every other RCA. When a utility gets in there or wants to do a job, or Wellington Water wanted to jump in there, the assets or the data they're collecting isn't robust enough for them to actually do a proper design. And we all know what that happens. Basically everything gets pushed out and costs go up. So we're driving it for us as a prerequisite that before you go in there, I don't care what as-built information you've got, you need GIS data to back it up. Before you dig, before I give you approval, unless it's GIS data. So in other words, those companies like Reveal who have ground probing radar, don't come to me, guys, because you can't give me a guarantee. So sorry, it's a couple of questions here, but I was just wondering how we're going on the first one anyway with the as-built information.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose talking to that, I think the as-built, you're exactly right. It's a utility's responsibility to do that, but I think it's not solving the problem. I mean, we've obviously put in a, and look, I'll be fairly open here. We've put in a significant amount of network over the last sort of 8-9 years. And it amazes me looking at as-built data how their drills managed to really keep that at 600. There is very little variance at the depth. And you can audit it, but on a scale of that, you're always only auditing a sample, and then you've got your contract, mechanisms from there. That's where we're installing it. But then we've got the developers installing our network, and again, we're reliant on their as-built. You'll audit a percentage, but it's not, you're still running a real risk, where the developer or that people don't value the information. And I remember, just as a sort of side example, when we were doing UFB, there was a discussion from one of our key contractors around undertaking NMR testing. We weren't going to adhere to the code because the contractor had figured out that it would be cheaper that we just deal with, if we tested everything, it's going to cost so much. If we just deal with a percentage of failures, it's going to cost less. So why don't we go that route? And that, I think, that often is what drives a lot of our contracts. We look at the lower costs where actually we should be adhering to the rules, and the benefits are not only in the contract you've got, but in future, the road not failing or the issues that are caused from that. You can fix it, but the contract is not allowing for all those other ongoing issues when that road fails. And that's the problem I see with as-built a little bit. The people that are collecting them and providing them, even if they are audited, often don't have any skin in the game, or don't see the value of them. They're just doing it to get the tick box.
Yeah, at least long term, they have no skin in it. The contractor wants in and he wants out. And it was interesting that even CCNZ admitted that contractors were taking shortcuts on the whole thing because it's not in their value chain to be hanging around and trying to do it better. And so it comes back on all of the industry that in the long term, if we look at it from an industry point of view, that we have to do it better. I think that one of the worst admissions came from Christchurch City Council when they said with the earthquake, the rush to get everything done and fix everything, they were lucky if they recorded 10% of the new stuff that went in the ground. And they had a huge opportunity to actually fix their network and have a decent as-built system across the city, and they dropped the ball.
But I think your second point there, Mike, just around and what's going on in Wellington, I think to me is where we need to start heading, because I mean we're talking about new assets, but there's an obligation in the code when you know, you're digging in the corridor, you come across an unknown or you know, an unmarked service, and then the owner of that service, if you can identify it, then should record that service. But practically that's fairly difficult. If you tell me that you've got 1 point data location for me for my network, I've got to do significant work to then, if I'm going to actually update my files, and the cost of that, I mean, not many utilities would do it, and this is the frustration. So something gets found, gets advised the utility, nothing's updated, and then it's just sitting there waiting for the next person to dig a hole, and it's the risk. So, you know, is there a slightly different way? And what, you know, Wellington City Council are looking at is, I think, a fairly good way of, you know, how can we start getting a shared database to start getting this data on? So it might not be the utilities records that are being updated, but you're providing a platform where the data is not lost, and slowly over time, it would hopefully be a merge of the two. But, you know, we'll sort of have to see how that goes. But I do like the initiative. I think Luke, you had a question? Lucas, sorry.
Yep. Hi. So look, I don't work with the code on a daily basis, but I'm basically the corridor manager effectively. And but one problem that we have, and that wasn't really raised before in this meeting, is the notification, the completion notice. We don't get those. Contractors or utility operators simply don't tell us when they're done at all. Now, we're a small local rural council. We also don't have the staff to chase all of these works. And I think just in the code, it doesn't, from what I can see, it doesn't really address that issue. In fact, I think in 4.7 basically says that if we haven't taken any action, then that's in a case where a works completion notice has been issued, but it doesn't tell you what happens if they don't issue it. Yeah, that's more a question probably, but it's just, that's something that we struggle with a lot.
It's something that, sorry, Nick.
Sorry, you go in.
What I was going to say is it's an issue that everybody struggles with. And the interesting one was Auckland Transport. And their one was that, well, if we haven't had a completion notice, the site's still open and nobody else can work there. So if you come along and you want to do work there, they'll tell you no, the site still belongs to such a party. When you find half, because at one stage they had, can you remember, Nick, was there something like 50,000 outstanding works completion notices, and they were simply saying, well, at this rate you won't get onto Auckland roads because there's going to be no places where people aren't working according to this. And I know that you, Nick, you got in there and said it's a liability to us, because that's the other side of the coin. It is a liability because they're still, in theory, working there. And you cleaned up all of Chorus's stuff. But it was it certainly became an issue, and there's those two aspects of it, that they're liable for the road maintenance because the site's still open, and do they really want to have that liability on the books? And all you have to do is, you only should have, Lucas, very few utility companies that are working in your area, and all you have to do, I'm assuming you're holding liaison meetings. At one of your liaison meetings, say to them, look, I won't give approvals for anything where there's still sites open, and you are responsible for the road maintenance in the meantime because your site's still open. And let's see how they react to that.
I got one more question, sorry, here. Sometimes they get too lazy to notify completion, or like, when they're starting the job, they don't even notify, or when they complete that job, they get too lazy to, to notify basically from Submitica. And other question is like, some people, they usually, like suppose somebody loads a corridor access request, and going down the line, sometimes he leaves the job and nobody will notify, how are we gonna know that it's still going on, it's not, because he will be the only one who get the emails. And you, as a TMC, I usually email them, but nobody reply back if it's completed or not completed, or, basically, yeah.
Well, the biggest problem, I think, is that the utility operator expects that the contractor will do that, and the contractor's gone because he's got another job to do. And so you don't get the notification. But it does live with the utility operator. And about all you can do is, well, you must know you didn't get a completion notice.
Yeah.
So if you do that, then really what you've got to do is keep, maybe on a quarterly basis, keep reminding them that these sites are still open. And it might then wake the utility operator up to the fact that the contractor never bothered to notify anybody that the work was done. And then it's just a matter of, hopefully, if they've got a list, you go around and you very quickly check and sign off the ones that on their list for them as part of the process.
But the thing is, there's so many that they don't notify, basically.
Yeah. The thing is, if there's no repercussions in the code, then this is not going to get solved, because all it does is it loads up the RCAs with additional admin. If we've got to ask them every month for their works completion notifications, we're not resourced for that. And this ties back directly to the data issue as well, because we can't ensure that the data is correct if we've got no hold on them once they're done.
Yeah, I think that this is an issue, and we're the chorus. I've got fair experience of different avenues of trying to resolve it. I think Submitica and to a degree my work sites, which would be the other main sort of system used nationally, they do provide a bit of automation, and I suppose there's a few things that you can look at doing there is ensure that any access has to have a utility contact on, because that way you can automatically email both the utility and the contractor, and that gives you an in to because the liability, as the NZ does sit with the utility. I think there's other things, Auckland, Wellington have used it, and it's harder for smaller, but the RCA can obviously claim fair compensation for all this chasing and things like that, and no one wants to create a new work stream, but I think that is probably the stick that some of the larger RCAs have used. But I agree. I mean, I've worked on the chorus side, and we amassed a lot, and we spend a lot of time trying to dig through and close things out. I think one of the other issues that's sort of come from Submitica is those often that do the applications aren't the ones doing the work. And we always looked for a slightly better, I think my work site's promised it, but a way of making it easier for those doing the work to actually start and stop, show that they're starting works and stop. But that's not the way our contracts have often lined up. So you've got an office admin that doesn't know these things and will wait for someone to tell them before they close off cars. So I think the big thing is suggest, this is the perfect time to suggest, you know, what do we think could move the dial? Because I believe technology could solve some of these problems, and you know, a bigger stick could also as well. But yeah, really keen to hear some insights on that. Paul, I think you've had your hand up for a while.
Thank you. Yeah. From the other side, I was just the comment about, well, if an unknown service is hit or located during works, and it's a lot of work for the utilities to find out, you know, to as-built it and things like that. It's also a big response, well, big onus on the person who has uncovered this service, because they've got no clues, and they're actually facing some huge costs as well. And even, you know, it's basically, there's not a lot of as-built data for stuff that's abandoned or obsolete. When you dig up and you as a contractor, they're just stuck with costs, and no one's sort of looking out for them. That was all.
Oh, look, yeah, Paul, and I didn't really mean to gloss over that, but I suppose that is the current state of play, and I'm very aware of the issues the contractors are facing in that. I suppose what I was probably touching on is why we're not seeing a shift from the utilities, and maybe we need a bit more of a stick or, you know, squeeze. It's unfairly sitting with the contractors at the moment, most of the problems around this. I mean, there's no doubt when you hit a service, suddenly the utility, it is their issue, but all the, I suppose, issues tend to sit with those trying to do the work rather than the asset owners. And I think the balance needs to shift. So we need more from the asset owners, is my, you know, view. I'm not totally sure exactly what that more is, but that was probably the point I was aiming at. So yeah, I agree totally about where a lot of the problem sits right now.
Yeah, just to add to that, I've just had a situation where we didn't hit a service, we just scraped it, and that's even worse because you've got a major minefield to work through to even work out who you're meant to be talking to find out if this is a thing or if it's just an old piece of galvanized pipe buried.
No, and yep, I agree totally, and that's why a lot of, you know, people will then just fill in the hole and
walk away.
Yep, because it's harder work trying to resolve those issues, and it certainly reminds me of when my time of working in the UK. Whenever we came across anything that looked heritage-like, you quickly covered it in and moved to the next hole because your site could be shut down for a long time. So yeah. Ian, shall I hand over to you? I don't think we've got any further questions.
I was just thinking, do you want me to switch around so that I've got control, or are you just going to keep going?
No, I will. You'll have to share it from your computer, I think, or you can get me to.
Yeah, I've
tap.
got it here. So if you jump out of there, and I will share my screen. Yeah. Why the heck did that do that? Now it's not syncing.
I can see your screen, Ian.
Can
So
you?
Yeah, we're on slide 13. You might just want to, which I didn't do for a while. Turn into
in that case,
PowerPoint mode.
Turn it into, as you say, PowerPoint mode. And you can get to appreciate this Okay. So let's move on with this. Probably find that this is not all that interesting to you, but it is something that the government wanted us to include. It's actually in the legislation, the Utilities Access Act, that we were required in the code to carry a conflict of interest statement. And that came out of the presentations to the Select Committee. But the problem is, I think we see it, is that what the code seems to be suggesting is you only have to do it once. And that's not really practical, because as you're well aware, we're talking about a business and set of business interests. And as far as that's concerned, business interests change all the time. And really and truly, if we are going to meet what the government expected of us, then we need to actually make it a practical system that is managed to suit the changes that are happening. And that's not currently spelled out. And there's a necessity to make it absolutely clear what our expectations are in the code. So, you know, any business, and Vector's a classic, I think, they've invested and later on they divested some of their interests. And so if they submitted a conflict of interest statement to us, as they were required to, because they had multiple utility interests in different industries, then they would have had to really, to do the job properly, they would have had to keep submitting new statements. And that would have been the appropriate way to go. Now, it's only for those particular cases that are identified in the Act and in the Code, and that's basically for a council as a corridor manager, if they're both a corridor manager and a utility operator, and currently most councils are, because they operate the three waters, then they should have a conflict of interest statement. And any utility that has multiple utility interests, in other words, they might be a telecommunications supplier, they might be an electricity supplier, it might even be a gas supplier. Together, they were required to actually have a conflict of interest statement that said that basically they wouldn't use those multiple interests to give themselves an advantage. And so really and truly, it's a matter of making sure things are updated from time to time. And the interesting thing is, if you were then to divest your interests and there was no conflict of interest, then you can actually withdraw the statement. But the code really needs to be updated, because at the moment, as I say, it basically only really expects that there will be one statement and that it won't change. And that clearly isn't the case. The second thing is that Nick was saying was about code effectiveness. You know, how do we make the code more effective? That's really what we set out to do. We put it to industry. We got the support. We put together a working group of different parts of the industry to sit down and have a think about it. We employed a consultant to lead the job and to produce the report for us. You'll find the report on our website. I suggest that it's worth actually taking a look at, but mostly we're looking at three aspects that came out of that. How do we improve the education approach? What might be needed in terms of better coordination? And how do we deal with conditions? And I'll come back to the conditions later, but we need to really look as an industry about how we might deliver a more effective code process. Unfortunately, when the report came out, it virtually arrived on our desks same time that COVID arrived in the world as we know it. And what we found was that the whole industry had a much different focus. They weren't really interested in looking at code effectiveness at that part. They were more about having to deal with the effects of COVID on their workforces and their productivity. So we've struggled as a group to really come to a point of how do we deliver it. And the way we've focused is to really look at education and training as the first real item that we want to address on that. And I guess the question is, do you agree with it? Is that what you see as your priority? At the moment, what we're looking to do is develop a form of online education and training. And just stalled a little because we made our budget clear to the people we were working with, and what came back to us was something that was unaffordable as we currently sit. And so we need to work on that a bit more. We've got a group within NZUAG who are busy looking at how they can do that, but the rest of us are looking at what about the other recommendations, what about the other things that need to be done, and in regard to some of the things that came out of it, can we get them included in the review? But one of the things that looks to the rest of the industry is about how do we deal with this? How do we address this under the current resources? As we're finding it very hard to fund things and very hard to keep the membership going at the moment in the current circumstances. So it's really a question that we've put out there. And maybe we'll get some feedback on it as part of the process. And in the same boat, you know, really, this is to us a big question. What value are we actually providing industry? I mean, what I've got there is what I think that we do, and that includes some of these education and communication initiatives, the things that we've been working on, the code effectiveness working group, the working group with CCNZ and WorkSafe and Before You Dig, and really looking at what are the big picture items. But what you've got to realise is this is all done by your board members, and they do it on a voluntary basis because there isn't any other support unless we step out to the industry. And I guess as members of that industry, we're looking to yourselves to point us in the direction of what it is that you actually want and expect. Looking at what resources, and if you want more than what we're doing at the moment, are you prepared to pay for it? So, I mean, there's a set of questions there. You can have a think about that. And really what we're trying to do is fill out the bit, you know, what's missing, what can be done, what can be done better. So if you can look at those questions and we'll look then to what sort of feedback we get as part of this process. And this is another opportunity for you to come back to us and ask questions. No? Okay. Well, in that case, there's nothing in the chat, is there, Colin? No? Okay. I'll keep going. So you're probably all aware of this one. And the interesting thing is that, in fact, there is a session this afternoon, I believe, in terms of what people consider the changes to traffic management may or should be. So the Transport Agency is currently consulting on it. And this is by terms of a feedback session this afternoon. But the thing is that the code relies on COPTIM as its means of compliance, if you like. How do we keep the wolf from the door? How do we demonstrate that we are looking at an appropriate level of health and safety for our agents and employees? But the problem that seems to be a general case is that COPTIM, as it currently sits, where everything's virtually supplied, has become a tick box exercise. And there's a really little thought going into the whole thing. It's supposed to be a risk-based assessment, but I can tell you quite frankly that just doesn't happen. And so it's really about how do we get to levels of acceptable risk. And I guess that's why they're looking to make changes. They're really looking to ensure that what's coming out the end of the process is fit for purpose. But there's really also a case on all of us of dealing with the non-compliances, of dealing with the things which are just not right that being done out on the road, because you know, basically we're responsible for that, all of us, and that doesn't exclude the road controlling authorities either. I mean, if we see things that are happening which are not appropriate, we need to take action ourselves, because becomes a liability on us for giving approvals for people to be there. So at the very least, the code's probably going to have to change. We need to make it appropriate for the traffic management regime that we have in the future. And really what we're looking at is this whole risk-based approach. That we need to focus on, that we need to get it right. From our point of view, as industry representatives and the ones who are supposed to be taking the responsibility, it's a hard fact that when things go horribly wrong out on the road, the consequences are not good. And I can tell you that from the point of view of the fact that one of our road workers was killed last week in a road accident. And so it doesn't sit very well from a safety point of view that that what we have in place is not suitable. So we certainly need to beef that up. We need to have the right things in the code. We need to have right things in the standard. And I'm already aware that some aspects will end up in other standards, because in particular, there's a group working on the equipment part of Coptum. That won't be in the new traffic management standard. It will be in a NZTA standard, and the question is, if we've got things like that, does the code need to adopt them? Do we accept them? And do we need to look at our own standards, perhaps? But then it comes down to, you know, is one aspect of that. If we do need standards and they're not there, do we need to actually have a think about how we produce it? And if we do decide to make our own standards, then we've got to have the resources to do that. We need to be thinking about that. We also need to, as part of the whole process, need to be thinking about what the training requirements are that sit alongside that. So it's a whole big can of worms that we need to think about and address as an industry. And I said we'd talk about reasonable conditions because this seems to be something that's an ongoing issue with the whole setup across the legislation and the code. And that page there, if you want to read it, is basically just a restatement of where we're at, really, from the point of view of what the legislation and the code says. So that's what we're looking at, and that's what we need to think about in terms of, well, have we got everything that's necessary in the code? Because if there are great heaps of conditions being used out there, what's the reason for that? And part of it might be that there are general conditions that are not in the current template, but the code has an expectation that the template is the be-all and end-all of what's necessary as far as the general conditions are concerned. And that may not necessarily be the case. The interesting part of that is I have talked to our legal people about that, and they say, well, if the conditions are reasonable, then they meet the legislative requirement and they should be able to be used. Now, they may be general conditions that should sit there, but the code implies that really and truly the general conditions are set. So if there are gaps in the template or the code itself that are being used as conditions, appearing as conditions, we should actually look at them and see if there is a sort of a general idea about what should be there, and we should set them together as a group and adopt them. And I mean, the aim has got to be still that we reduce the size of the list of conditions that we've got, because really and truly, Mike joked about it, but you know, we're looking at huge long lists and can't hardly be reasonable from the point of view of seeing all of those. So from that point of view, what we really want to see is if you've got examples of things that you think that you use over and over and over again, then perhaps what we should be looking for is an appropriate standard condition that's reasonable to both sides and is included in the code. But there are some aspects to it. We don't want to duplicate the code requirements. If we're doing that, and I've got to admit, I had to go through our conditions and I had to excise a whole lot of them because they were duplications or variations of what the code actually stated, and therefore they weren't needed and they were not helpful, to be quite blunt. They need to be conditions that apply pretty well to all and are used often, but they need to be reasonable. And I point out, I think it's clause 4.5.1.4, which is a lovely statement that was written originally by a lawyer, and you probably realize that when you read them. But it says what they have to do to be reasonable. What are the tests for being reasonable, and really and truly they need to come forward as reasonable conditions. And just like to point out that lovely picture, if you can see it, it does prove that the Australians do things bigger and better than us. That was a burst in a high pressure water main in Melbourne. So I think that's a great picture, but it's certainly not something I want to see happen very often, because I imagine that it's actually doing a hell of a lot of damage. The only saving grace is it was set off in a park. So are there any questions at this stage?
There's a couple of questions, Ian.
Yep.
One, I'll just go off the list first and then check it to you, Mike. But was around what was our involvement in the review of COPTIM, DTM as NZUAG? And I thought I'd leave that one for you because I believe you might have been a little bit more involved than I was.
I did get involved early on, but really and truly it's a matter, I think, of the industry itself taking an interest in it, because I actually have some work responsibilities to look at that at the point where it comes forward to be approved, and I didn't think that it was appropriate. I had a bit of a conflict of interest, and so I've talked to them a little bit about what their philosophy is and how they're approaching it, but I haven't got into the detail in any great amount.
Yeah, I thought that was the case, and it mirrored my memory. I believe we were engaged with, as the NZUAG early on, we were identified as a stakeholder, but I think we were more a keep informed stakeholder,
yes,
from memory. So I suppose I'll answer in the chat as well, but fairly limited, Corin. Julie has just sort of made a statement. Well, a lot of RCAs are not supporting the new guide, and I just wondered, Julie, if you wanted to. Obviously, I'm a utility. There are some really good things I see from NZTTM, but I've read, say, Christchurch. I've had a look at Auckland submission, And is it really the fear of public safety or the lack of trust of others sort of managing good outcomes in the corridor? Is that the general theme for RCAs, or?
No, it's basically around when the document was first put out, it was lacking a lot of information, and we've got another webinar with them this afternoon in regards to it. And we had some real concerns around the principals taking responsibility for their own traffic management plans and improving them, and then coming to the RCAs to veto them. So yeah, it was just basically lacking a lot of information when it was first put out. We totally understand and support the risk aspect side of it. We're all for that. But yeah, we just had a lot of concerns.
Yeah, and I sort of, again, that was similar to Chorus. We feel the implementation is a critical part here, and the document, as we've last seen it, will need a very staged implementation to be successful. So I just, so that might have been just a little bit of interest to my own part, but that was good. Jesse's just sort of made again another, with the new guide, temporary traffic being based on safety valves by the PCBUs themselves, how will the code reference standards? And he sort of said, I feel that you're correct, Ian, and saying the standards will have to be based in the code and no longer reference to COPTIM or NZGTM. Did you have anything to add to that, Ian, or?
No, if we go into the realm of having additional standards, they'll have to be referenced in the code. So if we want them, we need to attach them and make them part and parcel. Hopefully, we'll actually have the equipment standard come up during the current review. I talked to the safety people in my office yesterday, and they're not that far away from actually presenting it. So we get to have a look at it, and we can put that one on the review page, because I guess you guys will be interested. If it's not in the code itself, then you'll be interested to pick that up maybe, and it should largely be what you currently see in the code. It's a matter of making sure that one, you're happy with it, and B, if you are, then we put the appropriate links into the code itself, so it's included by reference.
We at WCC have about 20 plus other conditions, from communication through to more liaising, and finally to closing the shopping area off in the month of Christmas. And I mean, just my view on that, I suppose that's the point we're probably looking at raising here. Some of these conditions are very valid, and sometimes there's no place, it's not quite a general condition, because it might only apply to a time of year, or the specific works you're doing. Do you place it as a special condition? If you're placing it across all WAPs over a certain time of year, then it starts to get lost, and that's the concern we have when you've got lots of conditions. Some of them, we're not saying the conditions aren't actually, they need to be placed. It's just what you don't want to get lost is actual specific conditions for that WAP, which are quite critical to yourself, and that's what happens when you have a list of 20 or 30 conditions. I think a comment was made at the start of this that often people just don't read them because they just think they know them all. So that was just probably as what we were looking for feedback, and I don't know, Ian, if you've got any other comments on the conditions. Is there a slightly better way to tackle it to ensure that things still are made clear to contractors and the utilities, but we're not losing sight of key ones that they may not be aware of?
Yes, one of the reasons that we need to do this is there's been a lot of legislative change since the code came in, and yet we haven't changed the conditions. One of the general conditions that we use is simply saying if you strike something which is a cultural heritage site, you must comply with the appropriate piece of legislation, which wasn't there in 2012. And so there's no reference to it at all in the code. And the question then is, well, that may be one that can be easily resolved by putting something in the code itself. And then there's no need to actually have a condition that's anything like that. But but you're right, some of them might be locals and specials because they're actually, as you say, a time of the year, unless you have something in the code, for example, that says that you can't work just like the RMA says there's a hiatus period over Christmas. And for example, we would not allow works generally over the Christmas period, but the Auckland Harbour Bridge, for example, is one place, the only time of the year you can actually work on it is at Christmas, because everybody leaves Auckland. So what you'd have to have is potentially a condition in there, maybe in the code itself, that says that this is a hiatus period, but there's the possibility of being able to work in this period with a specific approval. And it would have to be demonstrated that the value to the community is such that it warrants working in that period. And that question then about, well, working in the shopping centre, it's the only time, potentially only time of the year you could work in a shopping centre like that, when it's all shut down. And so you'd have to look at it, as I say, from a community point of view and say, right, this is something that is then consulted on and appropriately decided by the community itself. And we could deal with it like that. So times of the year, not necessarily excluded, especially, you know, when you're talking specific requirements that are recognisable, quite frankly, from across the whole community situation. So potentially there are things there. If you can think of appropriate ones from your point of view, then we're interested to hear, because it may well be that we either amend the list of general conditions, or we actually think about whether it should be in the code itself.
Mike, you did have your hand up, but has your question been answered, or you got tired keeping your hand up?
Are you there, Mike? No. Oh,
So
I'll
we'll
chase
skip
him
on
up
that.
anyway, Nick. I can do that.
Yeah. So Julia's just made a comment. A guide is just that, a guide, and I certainly agree that was the sort of direction that we were given at the last sort of, I suppose, update for this. And of course, yes, it is up to the RCA. You know, we get into that best practice discussion, but whether the RCA wants to adopt it. But if we do put it into the code, then becomes legislation. I think probably if it's put into the code as mandatory, then yes, utilities will need to follow that. So I suppose that's just one of the, difficulties around this is conflicting sort of rules that a contractor will need to follow. So it is one of the things we've got to be very careful about. I don't know, Ian, would you add any other comments?
Yeah, I think that question, even internally here, hasn't really been sorted out because I'm not sure how you can deal with the health and safety legislation and have something that's not mandatory. So I would say that's a question that really still needs to be answered.
Great. I just sort of, with 7 minutes left, I don't know, Ian, do you want to just sort of push through on the last of those?
I think that is. Oh no, there is a few at the end. But basically, it's what we would normally expect. We really do want a contribution, so you can think about those questions in terms of the timing. What we're looking at is a two-step process. The first step will be to get everybody's submissions, and the second step will be to put all those out for people to comment on, so that we get the perspective from both sides, because I'm sure we'll get some that might well be well out there, but there might be germs of truth in there that we need to pull out, but it needs to be something that, as an industry, both sides can accept. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at making sure that there's balance across the whole lot. We'll certainly make it possible for people to comment, to understand what we're talking about, because we'll provide a track change version. Don't forget, everything will be on that page that we were talking about, the code review page on our website. And also, don't forget, we have a watchdog. Treasury will be briefed, and they will be looking over our shoulders through the process to make sure that it is fair and robust, because it's got to go. And at the end of the process, it will actually, it's not just the minister. The minister will have to present it to cabinet, and if the cabinet's happy with it, then he can approve it. So we're going to commence the whole process really with these webinars. We announced the launch at the RIMS conference, which was at the end of, pretty much at the end of July. What we're really looking at is getting the submissions in by the 7th of October. So why the industry is aware of this, we actually have to make it public. We aim to notify the public on about the 5th of September. So they'll get a month, but you've got a month and a half basically to look at it. The second round, as you can see, will be in February next year. It's going to take us a little while to go through all of that. It's a long and quite arduous process if we get quite a few submissions. And I'm really saying that, in fact, we've allowed for a whole lot of time, and we'd like to see a whole lot of submissions, quite frankly. The end of the process, as you can see, if we look at the timing we've had in previous rounds, you're not going to actually see it till about the end of next year. And that's just basically a statement of what we believe to be the basis of this whole time. The important thing is that's our contact address. You can just Google us. NZUAG gets you to our website, no problems at all. Because there's another classic one, that's a arcing effect. On a street in Petone, but you can see how far away the people are standing. They basically had to shut the power down on a whole area of Lower Hutt City because they managed to cause a short circuit and get the whole thing arcing. I find that quite amazing. But, basically, it's not something we want to see. And the only good part of all of that, from memory, is there were no injuries at all. Thank goodness. And that is largely us. And so if you've got any further questions, any comments, if not, thank you very much for coming. Appreciated your input so far, and we'll look forward to your submissions.
There will be a discussion document and a response form will be going up on our website within the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for that, and that will be an online response form. So you'll be able to fill that and send feedback to us.
If not, I believe, Colin, if there's no more questions, nothing in the chat, then